Hi there, Andre here from Peak Motorcycles. It's been a few weeks since I've last done a video about my CRF300. This has mainly been due to me not having any suspension. So, as you may remember, my forks were taken off the bike and they were sent off to Andriani in Italy to be fitted up for some Misano Evo fork cartridges. The first one's for a CRF300 Rally. They got back in touch to say that they'd checked the internals and they actually were exactly the same as the 300L. Was I sure that they came off a Rally? And they definitely did come off a Rally. They've fitted them out, returned them to me, and instead of taking a couple of weeks, I was hoping to get them back, I think the week of the 16th of May. Instead, I just got them back today on the 4th of June. This is going to be a video of me refitting them to my bike just in time for my first service tomorrow. I've also got my Nitron rear shock, but I'm not going to have time to put that on this evening, but I'll certainly get to that over the weekend. So yeah, this should be fairly straightforward. I'm just going to do the reverse of what I did last time. I've got a copy of a CRF250 Rally service manual, which has the torque settings for the front end. So I'm going to reuse that. Before I start, I'll just give you a quick look at the forks as they are on the bench, and then I will crack on with fitting them to the bike. There you go, these are my forks. Everything from this end all the way up to the end is exactly the same as when I took them off the bike. So where the variation is the top caps. So instead of having the Honda top caps that were on before, I've now got these Andriani top caps, where they have the outer one is the adjuster for the preload on both sides, and then one is for compression damping and the other is for rebound damping. Now I do have a slight mark on the top of one of them, so they are going to get me some new caps to go on there. However, rather than be without the bike for any longer, because it has been about 6 weeks, I'm going to install these as they are and then get them fixed up as and when. So the first one I'm going to put in is the one that goes on the right hand side. Now these are, I'm just going to slide them up into the fittings, and then I'm just going to use a 10mm socket just to tighten up the pinch bolts, and then I'll torque them up properly afterwards. So that just fits in from under that. Get that around a little bit. There we go. Just going to do these pinch bolts up with a ratchet just to keep it tight, and then I'll torque them up properly once they're both in. Okay, that's one side in. Go and do the other side. You'll see that sticking out the top. Checking that with the other side, making sure it's up to the same point. Drop it down a fraction of a millimetre. There we go. So I'm just going to do these up, just tight to hold it. So that's those done up like that. I think to get this top one done up, I'm going to have to remove this guide to get the torque wrench. I'm just going to remove this bolt just so I can take this off so I can get my torque wrench onto those properly. One thing I did think of was that someone mentioned to me that there's quite a lot of movement in the clamps on this bike. So what I'm probably going to do is actually put the front wheel back on, fit everything lower down before I tighten the bolts up fully, just so that the forks can equalise out properly. So this one is an 8mm hex bolt. Let's take that off. There we go. That'll just drop down. There we go. So I can get to those properly. I'm just going to refit the ABS sensor back into that. And again, I'll torque that up properly, checking what that covers up. So that does actually cover up the ABS sensor. So actually I'll just do that up before I refit the fork protector and make sure that's tight. It's not load bearing, so I'm not as worried about that as any others, but actually that's as tight as it'll go anyway. So there's three screws to hold this back together. Making sure that I'm not snagging anything. I don't know if you can see that there's a groove under there for the ABS wire to go through. There we go. That's on. So it's just three bolts to do that up. And the third one, which you probably can't quite see, but believe me, it's just on the inside here. And on this side it's exactly the same, but without the ABS sensor to worry about. So that just goes straight back on. So these fork protectors, it is 7 Newton meters and it's a 5mm socket. That's that side done. And then just on this side, this inner one that you couldn't see from the other side. Okay, so that's those in. So that's ready to have the front wheel go back on again. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to put the front wheel on, I'm going to push the bolt through, I'm going to tighten it up, and I'm going to drop the bike down on the stand with the front wheel on the floor to tighten everything up. So now when I took this apart, I thought I had a gap on the side. I'd asked the question on one of the forums on Facebook, and some people seemed to have a gap, others didn't. So I'm interested to see whether I actually still have the gap. It's actually on this side. When I put the bolt back through. I'm just going to put a bit of extra grease on the axle. I don't think Honda are particularly generous with grease when they put them on, and as the wheel's off, I might as well do it. So these are the two protectors that come off. There we go. So I'm just going to loosen off these pinch bolts all the way before I try and fit the axle. Make sure that is aligned. Okay, so that will go through like that. Cool. Oh, there we go. Okay, so I have that done up tight now, and I'll torque it up properly, but actually, let me move the camera. So I don't know if you can see that in that. There is definitely a gap in here, but it's not, it's actually the spacer is hard up against it. So I think there is supposed to be that gap between the end of the spacer and the end of the fork. So I know some people have told me that there wasn't a gap at all, but I definitely have a few millimeters there. And it's not because it's not exposed axle, so it's not because it's not tightened up enough. And I think even when that's torqued up, it's not going to change a great deal. So yeah, so if when you're doing this and you feel like you're missing a spacer, it is definitely supposed to be like that. And the wheel does turn freely. So last few things to do: put the brake caliper back on, put it on the ground, torque everything up, give it a bit of a bounce, and then I should be all set. Yeah, and if you can see, there is this metal bracket on the caliper, which I think is fitted only to the Rally, just because the front brake disc is bigger on the Rally than it is on the L. And it probably means they can use the same caliper on the two bikes. And the last one is just to refit this fitting back onto the fork guard. Okay, so I think that is everything back together, other than refitting this bracket back up at the top. So I'm going to drop the back down onto the ground, give it a bit of a wobble, and then I'm just going to torque everything up exactly as it should be. First I'm going to do up is the front axle bolt, which is almost at the limit of this torque wrench at 73.5 Newton meters. I do have a bigger one if this one won't quite get there. 73.5. See if I can get enough leverage on it to just do that up. There we go. That's 73.5 on that, and there is still most definitely a gap in there, but the spacer isn't moving. I'm pretty sure that is exactly how it's supposed to be. So now I'm going to do it with 4 pinch bolts. So these pinch bolts all need to be done at 20 Newton meters. Okay, so that's those done up. Next up, I think I'll do the brake caliper. So the brake caliper is 30 Newton meters. Oh. And also a larger socket. That's a 12mm socket for the brake calipers. There we go. Okay, that's all done up. So the last few I've got to do are actually the pinch bolts that hold the new suspension in place, and then I think I'm all done. So before I tighten up the pinch bolts, I'm just going to put a bit of pressure on the front end. I'm going to take this rope off the back that's been holding the stopping it from tipping forwards. So all of these pinch bolts need to go up to 32 Newton meters. And that one, close to taking the head off it. So I think that's possibly going to need a new bolt. Okay, that's one side done. The very last thing I need to do is just to refit this cable guide, which just goes back on the top of there, and that is it. So the very last thing I'm going to do is I'm going to take it off the stand and then just get on it, just see how, see how high it is, see how much it compresses, see if the side stand still does its job, which was not a worry, but something I'm aware of. So yeah, I'll go and sort that out now. So that front really does feel quite different. It's much firmer than the stock fork was. To be honest, I can't really tell how it's going to perform with the damping when I'm off-road, but it certainly feels very different. And actually, it now makes the rear certainly feel very bouncy indeed. So I do have my Nitron shock to go on. I'm not going to have a chance to do it tonight. So I'm just going to ride the bike like this tomorrow and see how it goes. So that's it. That's my video of refitting the forks to my CRF300 Rally. I've learned a few things. Firstly, that it's a lot easier to get the front wheel back on if you don't have the brake caliper on. I think I knew that already, I've just forgotten it over the years. There's not a lot of grease on the front axle, so that's worth re-greasing when you put it on. And the 32 Newton meter torque setting for the triple clamp pinch bolts. I mean, I've got some fairly good sockets. They're Draper Expert sockets that grip with points rather than edges. And on a couple of the bolts, just as I was getting to the torque limit, it did take a couple of corners off the bolts. Now the bolts are still usable, I'll still get them out, but I think I will be replacing them, and I'll probably see if I can get any better quality bolts to put back in instead. So that's it, that's my video. Hopefully there'll be more to come now that I've got the bike back. So I'll be riding it tomorrow for its service. I know I've got a few other things lined up, including fitting the rear shock, taking the plastics off, and my exhaust comparison. So anyway, thank you very much for watching. Hope this has been interesting and useful, and I will see you